Why is it that some churches grow and grow and grow, and other churches like decline and decline and decline until eventually they end up closing their doors? I mean, think about it. Isn't it curious that you can have two churches in the exact same city, two churches in the same neighborhood, and they can have such drastically different storylines? The one can be just, up and to the right, and the other one is down and to the left. I mean, I work in a church, and I still can't figure it out how such different histories can be the reality for different churches that are so close to each other. Last month, while we were in Holland, we had the opportunity to go to a church that has been doing nothing but growing since 1989. The church started in 1923, and in 1989, so how many years later is that? It was a small, struggling congregation of just 60 people. Less than we have here. 60 people. But since 1989, Bethel Baptist Church in Drachten has grown to just under 3,000 people. 3,000 in 21 years. Amazing. By all accounts, Bethel Baptist Church would be what we would call at River City, and in this series, an unstoppable church. It's an unstoppable church. Meanwhile, neighboring churches in the city of Drachten have pretty much declined and declined and declined since 1989. And sadly, some are nothing better than just tourist attractions or sites along a tour for a picture of a beautiful building. So what's the difference? How do you account for such different storylines? I mean, if you had the choice, wouldn't you choose to belong to a healthy, vibrant, growing church versus a struggling, unhealthy, declining church? Of course you would. And I would too. The bad news is that there is no silver bullet. There's no one answer that's going to enable a church to go from struggle and decline to thriving and growth. There's no magic pill that we could distribute and give to everybody on a Sunday morning and then see the kind of transformation and growth that we desire. Whatever you do, don't drink the Kool-Aid. The good news is that by studying unstoppable churches, study that I've done, study that others have done, people have been able to identify 4 marks that seem to characterize churches that experience that growth and that trajectory that I think any believer in any church would truly long for. And throughout this series, Unstoppable Church, we've been discovering those unique marks together. In week 1, we learned that the first mark of an unstoppable church is that it has a vision to die for. Unstoppable churches have a vision to die for. And we saw that in the Acts 2 church. At River City Church, our vision is to be a church where everyone is welcomed, everyone is needed, and everyone is changed. Welcomed, needed, and changed. Who's welcome? Anyone. Who's needed? Everyone. And what kind of change are we talking about here? Changed into fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ, whose sacrifice we just celebrated a few moments ago. I mean, I might be biased, but I would say that's a vision to die for. Number 1 mark of an unstoppable church is it has a vision to die for. Week 2, we learned that the second mark of an unstoppable church is that it is characterized by this unity, what we might call togetherness. There's a togetherness amongst those who would call that church their home, and I think this just makes better sense. I mean, it's common sense, right? What church stands a better chance of growth in the future? A mega church where everyone is backbiting and disunified and there's no togetherness, no community, or a small struggling church of 60 where everybody wakes up and says, you know what, we got to get united in this. We got to get together in this. And again, I think the answer is obvious. The small church is not the mega church today, but if it's unified and together, it stands a better chance of growth in the future. And in this regard, each of you play a role in helping this church to become an unstoppable church. How do you help? You help by focusing on what unites us And you commit to a growing sense of togetherness with the people that are seated around you and the people that are on the other side of the auditorium. You commit to that. And as we do, we become unstoppable like a crash of rhinos, as we talked about last week. And then we talked about the third mark of an unstoppable church. And the third mark of an unstoppable church is a church where everybody serves out of their spiritual giftedness. It's where they recognize that the real gains are to be won on the field, not in the stands. And so people get out of their seats and they offer up what they have, even if they think it's small, and they make a difference in building the church. And this was something we talked about last week, but bears repeating. God doesn't call the prepared, He prepares the called. And so young or old, if you're part of this church, if this is your church home and you love Jesus Christ, then you are a minister in this place. You're a minister at River City Church. And we discovered last week through looking at Peter's life that God often does His best work through average, ordinary, everyday people. I think that's part of what makes God God. He doesn't need the Harvard graduate. He doesn't need the people at the top of the class. He can take average, ordinary people and He can accomplish extraordinary things through them if their hearts are willing, if they're willing to offer up their gifts and service. And you, again, have an opportunity to help this church to become an unstoppable church as you roll up your sleeves and you recognize your calling to make a difference in this place. Well, this morning we're going to wrap up our series on Unstoppable Church by looking at the fourth and final mark. We've looked at vision, we've looked at togetherness, we've looked at the importance of serving out of our spiritual giftedness, and today's mark will not surprise you, I hope. Today's mark is love. Unstoppable churches are ones where there is this commitment to loving well amongst the people who call that church their home. An unstoppable church is people love each other well. Now, of course, love is an overused term today. I can say I love pizza. I love it when Holland wins World Cup games. And I love my wife, Barb. Now, hopefully, I'm using the term love in a different sense in each of those instances. Hopefully, I love pizza, winning, and my wife in completely different ways. And I do, by the way. So what does it mean to love well others who are part of your church family? How should those of us who call River City Church home commit to loving well? And that's what I want to spend a few minutes talking about with you this morning. How many of you have heard of a series called Left Behind? Raise your hands if you've heard of Left Behind. Okay, so about a fifth of you, maybe a quarter of you have heard of it. Left Behind was a series of books, fictional books, 16 of them written between 1995 and 2007, which espoused or articulated the end times interpretation of its two authors, Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins.